Hey everybody, today we are going to be looking at the idea of manifest destiny and also looking at the way in which Americans begin to settle the territories of Oregon and Texas. Here are your goals. Alright, so let's begin with the concept of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was basically the belief that America had a God-given right to rule over the whole continent of North America. This idea was really big in the middle of the 1800s, and it motivated thousands of Americans to head west and to settle new lands. The phrase originally came from an American journalist, John O. Sullivan, and you can read that block quote there if you would like. He basically says that God has given America this territory, and he wants us to use it for our attempt at setting up a new kind of free government. There's a picture of Manifest Destiny there where this goddess-like figure, the goddess of freedom perhaps, accompanies American settlers as they head west. Here we can see a map of the pattern of American westward migration. And this is looking at America from the time period between 1830 and 1845. So basically you can see if you look at that map, you can see there are two different streams of settlement. There's one big stream headed to the Oregon territories, which you can see up there in the top left corner. That is the northwest corner of the continent. And most of these guys who are heading there are northern people from the northern part of the eastern United States. And they are making their way across the Great Plains to the fertile farmland of Oregon, and they are setting Oregon up as a free, slaveless society. On the other hand, there are the southern settlers who are moving west from Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana into what will later become the Republic of Texas, even though it's originally controlled by Mexico. And this area of Texas offers a lot of really good farmland, especially for cotton. And so a lot of southern settlers are heading west, bringing their slaves with them, and setting up plantations and stuff just like we see in the rest of the South. So let's start by looking at how Texas breaks away from Mexico. So Mexico was originally part of Spain, but it breaks away from Spain in 1821. In order to try and boost the population of its northeastern territory, aka Texas, which originally doesn't have very many people living there, Mexico decides to invite Americans to settle there. They basically say, hey, you can come have this good cheap land as long as you do two things. One, you have to give up slavery, and two, you have to listen to whatever the Mexican government says. Basically, the people who move there were supposed to be leaving America and becoming Mexican. But so the Texans take up their offer, and thousands of Americans move to Texas and set up a life there. But these people don't really listen to the Mexican government. They refuse to give up slavery, and they basically just ignore the Mexican government whenever it tells them to do something. By 1836, Mexico had had enough, so it sends a general named Santa Anna to invade Texas and make them listen. But Santa Anna is actually beaten by the Texans, and he ends up signing a treaty in order to recognize Texan independence. In 1837, 1 year after Texas wins its war against Mexico, Texas asks to join the United States. But the United States rejects this request. And the main reason is that they are worried that by accepting Texas as a slave state, it would upset the balance between free states and slave states and maybe cause conflict or civil war between the North and the South. For this reason, Texas remains independent from 1837 to 1845. You can see a map there of all the territory that Mexico originally controlled. Of course, Mexico's territory goes further south than this, including all of present-day Mexico. But originally, Mexico controlled this huge chunk of the southwest part of what is today the United States. Now let's move north. Here is how Oregon came to be colonized by the United States. So in 1818, Britain and the United States came up with a deal where they basically just agreed to share this giant wilderness on the west coast. They didn't really draw a line between where British people would settle and where American people would settle. And the idea was that since Oregon was so far away, they didn't really think it would ever be settled, at least not for, a couple hundred years. So they figured it didn't really matter where they drew the line, and people could just live wherever they wanted. And so from 1818 to 1830, thousands of Americans and also British Canadians moved to the area and settled along the rivers there. And so everything seems fine, and this whole deal seems like it makes sense until in the 1840s, Americans are gripped by something that is called Oregon fever. Basically, it just becomes really popular among a lot of Americans to move to Oregon. And what you see is thousands and thousands of Americans start making their way west and setting up a life in Oregon. And basically, the reason they move there is there's cheap, really fertile farmland up for grabs in this area. And so by 1846, you see more than 5,000 American settlers had made the trip. And by this time, what that meant is that the Americans vastly outnumbered the British people in the area. And so around this time, the United States starts to think that maybe Oregon could become a state. So they start to set up talks with Britain in order to divide Oregon into a northern section that will go to Britain and a southern section that will go to the United States. And so basically by 1845, Oregon is on the way to statehood as a free state because none of the settlers there wanted to bring slaves into the territory. Okay, so let's talk about the relationship between manifest destiny and the risk of civil war. This is a big deal, and it's one of the big things that helps to cause the Civil War later on. And so by the middle of the 1800s, the United States was divided evenly between free states in the north and slave states in the south. And so the slave states and the free states disagreed just about on every issue. The slave states thought slavery should spread. The free states thought slavery should be kept where it is. The slave states hated tariffs. The northern states liked tariffs because they helped factories to grow. Basically, on every issue, they disagreed. And so it was amazing that these guys were still even part of the same country and that they didn't split apart. The reason that they were able to work together without splitting apart, was that there was a balance of power in the Senate what helped them to keep the peace. And what this meant is there was an even number of free states and slave states, so both sides had the same number of senators in Congress. But what this meant is that any westward expansion of the United States was a threat to this peace between the North and the South, because it meant that a new state could throw off the balance between the North states and the South states. So, for example, if Texas came in as a slave state all by itself, it would upset the balance and give slave states power over the free states. On the other hand, if Oregon came in as a free state, this would threaten to throw off the balance in favor of the North, which could then pass laws against slavery or raise the tariff as high as it wanted to, and stuff like that. So, basically, a lot of people were worried that this westward expansion and this growth into Texas and Oregon was going to lead to conflict. And the way that people deal with this helps us to understand where the Civil War eventually comes from. We'll talk more about that, lots more, in future videos. Your goals again, thanks for sticking with me. See you guys tomorrow.